This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560. The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. So yesterday, President Trump, with Republican Senators Tom Cotton of Arkansas, David Perdue of Georgia, introduced an immigration reform proposal to cut legal immigration in half, at least the number of green cards issued annually, reduce immigration based on family ties, end the lottery that gives people from underrepresented countries a chance to emigrate to the U.S., replace the existing system with an app process prioritizing high-skilled workers, English speakers, and newcomers who are financially stable enough to avoid the welfare system, reallocating 140,000 green cards currently available based on employment. And Stephen Miller is a senior policy advisor, speechwriter.
You mean Pee Wee Herman?
Well,
because that's what I saw up there on the lectern yesterday.
Yeah, he came out to his theme music. And everybody was kind of bopping their head along. And then he got into this exchange with Jim Costa from CNN.
You're a nerd.
I know you are, but what am I?
You're an idiot.
I know you are, but what am I?
I know you are, but what am I? I know you are, but what am I?
It did turn
I know
into
you are,
that.
but what am I? I know you are, but what am I?
I know you are, but what am I?
So that went on for about 10 or 15 minutes.
Make it stop.
But so much was made of the Acosta contretemps with Miller and the back and forth and and some of the incredible things Acosta said, which we'll get to. But I thought the more interesting exchange was between Glenn Thrush and Stephen Miller.
Oh.
Glenn Thrush, the self-identified hack, formerly of Politico, now of the New York Times. And listen to this exchange about low-skilled workers, since this is central to the disagreement, the preference being given. And let's emphasize again, much like we have to talk about the travel ban being temporary, we have to talk about low-skilled versus high-skilled being a preference, a merit-based system. It is not precluding banning low-skilled workers. It is offering suggesting and mandating a preference based on a merit-based system. That's important to recognize. And so Miller's point on that order.
The people who have been hurt the most by the policy you're advocating are immigrant workers and minority workers and African-American workers and Hispanic workers.
And it has African-American community. Now, you brought it up again. You said you wanted to have a conversation and not target. Is it going to be a target?
This is what we want to do.
Using the African-American community, are you going to target? I'm not trying to be funny.
Right, and I know what you're saying. What you're saying is 100% correct. We want to help unemployed African Americans in this country and unemployed workers of all backgrounds get jobs. And insinuations like Jim made, trying to ascribe nefarious motives to a compassion immigration measure designed to help newcomers and current arrivals alike, is wrong. And this is a positive, optimistic proposal that says 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, we want to have an immigration system that takes care of the people who are coming here.
That was April Ryan, but yeah.
And the people that are here, and the exchange that was central to the piece of the exchange central to the Glenn Thrush response was his question, Miller's: to whom do we owe a duty? To whom do we owe a duty? People that are coming here illegally, people that are here illegally. People that, in their opinion, I don't necessarily subscribe to this totally, people that are depressing wages, taking jobs from American citizens, so forth. Or do we owe a duty to those that are American citizens who are underserved, who have had marginal economic opportunities to that specific exchange you just mentioned with April Ryan about the unemployment rate among African-American men, for example? To whom do we owe a duty? That seems to be the operative question informing the policy, and that's where you have a substantive policy discussion rather than the Jim Acosta, you're racist silliness. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Jessica Vaughan. She's the Director of Policy Studies at the Center for Immigration Studies. Jessica, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
I'm glad to be with you.
So your perspective on Trump's proposal and the criticism of it, particularly as it pertains to low-skilled versus high-skilled.
Well, I think this is a really exciting proposal and would be the biggest remake in our immigration system in 50 years. And it would modernize our legal immigration system and restructure it to make sure that our immigration program serves our country without harming people, or at least minimizing the harm that might occur to people who are on the margins already of our society and need to have access to job opportunities that will keep them self-sufficient. And this will have an expectation that immigrants to the country will be self-sufficient as well. And it's funny, it means creating a point system so that the most competitive applications are the ones that get chosen for green cards rather than just people who've been in line the longest or who have been sponsored by a family member. People still will be able to bring in their spouses and children under this proposal, and their other relatives can continue to come in too if they are highly skilled and have other things to bring to our country. But it's a really great idea, and one I think that is a discussion that's long overdue. You know, we need to talk about which immigrants in light of the reality that so many people in the world want to come here and that we cannot allow everyone to move here and become citizens, which ones are we going to choose? And how do we make that decision? And I really like the fact that it's market-based. You know, the highest-scoring immigrants will get those merit-based applications, and people will still be able to bring in spouses and children from overseas. I think that's a nice balance.
So do you think this sounds fair? I mean, so it is a point system, a merit system, and to earn points under the RAISE Act, if you're young, between 26 and 30, that's preferred, well-educated, speak English as determined by standardized testing. If you're a Nobel Prize winner, Olympian, or similar, or if you have a highly qualified spouse, does this seem biased or discriminatory in any way, especially if maybe you're 50 and you're still highly educated, but you're not young, so you're not going to earn as many points?
Well, we have to discriminate in some way. You know, I hate to call it that, but it's, people have to compete for the limited number of green cards that are going to be available. And there may be different levels of competition in any given year, but people will be competing on the basis of their merit, not just waiting a long time in line. And I think that's exciting. In that way, we can ensure that the best and the brightest people in the world are going to be coming in, and I think it's going to bring us a more diverse flow of immigration. I think it's going to create room for those entrepreneurs and innovators that we don't currently have a category for. And I think that ought to be a priority for our government rather than what we have is, a massive system with 2/3 of the people who are coming in get to come here just because they're related to somebody who came before them, and not even a close immediate family member, but a brother or sister or someone who's grown and been living on their own for a long time in their country.
Right, and so this prompts the question: if we're going to do this merit-based system, and if we're going to bring in these highly skilled people that have so much to add, as you're describing, then why cut the overall number in half? How does this administration know what the magic number is? Why put a number on it at all? Why not see what you get?
Well, what they're doing is basing this on the bipartisan Blue Ribbon Jordan Commission recommendations of the 1990s, where a group of people came together and said, we've got to make choices. How are we going to do that while recognizing that we can't have unlimited immigration to the country because that has negative effects as well. And the system that we have is really failing in a number of ways. One is that it is creating a system that depresses the wages of Americans and recent legal immigrants who are trying to get those same job opportunities. And the unfortunate reality is that since it's so family-based, about half of legal immigrants in our country right now are dependent on welfare programs, and that's something that's unsustainable for taxpayers. So, it's clear that we need to address both quantity and quality. And I know that sounds a little bit inhumane, but I think it's the easiest way to express it that people understand is that we have to address both the number of people who are coming in and the way we select them.
The issue of low-skilled immigrants depressing wages. There was a study done of Denmark in the 1990s and 2000s by a couple of academic economists. And it was with respect to refugees who had fled then Yugoslavia for Denmark. Their paper found that actually the refugees, because of the Danish policy of dispersing them, not dispersing them throughout the country, not based on economic opportunity, but just dispersal. It was called a spatial dispersal policy, dispersing them around Denmark. They examined what happened when a large number of low-skilled immigrants got plunked down next door all over a country, right? And what they found is instead of a small negative effect on the local native-born as it pertained to wages and opportunities, as many studies have found in the U.S., as I concede, low-skilled immigrants there actually raised the wages of their less educated native-born counterparts in the surrounding area. And this was a study that followed the native-born workers for some time so they could watch the changes that occurred. And what happened essentially is the native-born shifted from manual labor jobs to office jobs, which usually paid higher wages. The unemployed also got a slight boost that low-skilled natives tended to enter the workforce when immigrants showed up nearby. In other words, the competition lifted all boats, if you will. So are we certain that the talking point that low-skilled workers necessarily depress wages?
That's a really interesting study and one that I was not familiar with, and I wish that our government did what some other countries like Denmark and Australia and a few others do, and that is study what happens with immigrants over time, and not necessarily all of them, but, a random sample, a representative sample. There has been a study similar to that that's been done in the United States, and that is a study of what happened after the Cuban Mariel boat lift,
right,
where most of them ended up in Florida. And it turns out that the opposite was true, and I don't know what's different about Miami at that time period from Denmark for this study, but it turned out that here, after that episode, the presence of those new arrivals who matched the skills of the less educated people who are already in the United States, it turned out that they did have an adverse effect in the local labor market where they were, and that the fact that they were willing to work for less did displace American workers and have a depressing effect on the wages of everybody who was working in the same types of jobs. And that sort of makes sense according to basic economics, the laws of supply and demand that we all learned.
Well,
that would happen.
Yeah, I mean, I know that study. There's a problem with that study, though, and the problem is, of course, that Castro cleaned out the prisons and sent a lot of the least desirables through the boat lift to Florida, which is why ultimately the boat lift was discontinued by Carter.
That is true. But in terms of what, the economic effects of them being in the labor market, it's basically they were, less educated, and we have Americans and legal immigrants who, for whatever reason, are, have not had access to higher education or didn't choose to, and so they're competing for those same jobs. So it's just really a labor market issue. I don't think that necessarily the criminality aspect of it plays in as much, but because some of them, if they were career criminals, weren't in the labor market, they were finding earnings in other ways.
Yeah.
So I don't know that we can ever do a perfect study that's going to predict the future, but we do know what has happened in the past, and that is that our immigration system is bringing in large numbers of people who are not becoming self-sufficient and accessing welfare programs, and that has had a harmful effect in many parts of the country for those very Americans that we should be doing, that the government should be doing whatever it can to help them access jobs and succeed and be self-sufficient. And do that in a way that also preserves our tradition of allowing people to marry people from another country and have them immigrate as well. But we also can't ignore the benefits to our economy for bringing in people who are highly talented, skilled, and motivated, and who are going to create jobs for perhaps those same people who are now displaced by our current immigration system, because right now we don't have a category for innovators or people who have an idea that they want to pursue here and are highly qualified to do it, or for, even if they're athletes and entertainers that can contribute in other ways. That category doesn't exist to a great extent right now. And I think we should have our immigrants compete for those green cards as well.
Yeah, we need more Mark Anthony's and Shakira's. And she's Jessica Vaughan, CI Director of Policy Studies at the Center for Immigration Studies. Jessica, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And we got a text from the Amish texter. He makes a good point. The RAISE Act will cut legal immigration in half, and that's just due to slashing the Democrat congressional IT staff.
That's good. Jessica joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
If you're talking